Hello, young Steve and I are recording these jokes at the end of 2021. This is not my attempt at stand-up comedy. I'm just recording my favorite jokes. I warn you that many of them are not in the best taste. They're kind of low bucket kind of stuff. No kids, please. I'm doing this because I have life assurance until I'm 80, but I'm 77. I'm a coot. I'm a geezer. I'm heading towards that bucket I'm ordained to kick. Any day could be my last. And I want to make sure I record these jokes before I lose my marbles and I'm not able to make nonsense anymore. And I also hope that maybe when I'm drinking beer with Uncle Fred and Jesus, my grandchildren's children can have a raunchy laugh along with me. So this guy comes home, he walks into the kitchen with his hands covered with shit. And he says to his wife, "Honey, look what I almost stepped in." These old people, this old couple come to get a divorce. They got to be in their 90s and they've been married 73 years. And the lawyer says, "Why have you waited so long?" And the woman says, "Well, we were waiting for the kids to die." I was at a small comedy club and they had a ventriloquist. He wasn't bad. He and his dummy, his puppet, were going away at it. He was telling jokes about this and that, and he went down a whole set of blonde jokes, like why don't blondes like M&Ms? Because they're too hard to peel. A blonde goes to see a doctor and says, "I'm not feeling so good." And the doctor examines her and says, "You're pregnant." And she says, "Oh my God, I hope it's mine." Anyway, this blonde springs up and goes right up there to the guy and says, "Stop it with those blonde jokes. Blondes are not all dumb. I'm a blonde. I'm not dumb. It's sexist and it's out of date and you're just making everything rotten when you tell jokes like that." And so the ventriloquist says, "Okay, you're right. I stop. I won't tell any more blonde jokes." And she says, "Hey, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to that asshole who's sitting on your lap." There was a young man who was fed up with society. He said, "I don't want to live like this anymore." So he sold everything and he moved out to Wyoming and he bought a small cabin way out in the mountains. And he was living totally alone, no electronics, nothing. And he was pretty happy. And one day he was sitting on his little porch and way off in the distance, coming down from a mountain, he saw somebody walking towards him. And as the man got closer and closer, he saw that it was an old man, a scuzzy looking guy. He probably hadn't had a bath in a year. Oh, he was a mess. And the guy stumbled to him, walked over, and he said, "Hey, listen," he said, "I see you through the scope. I have a telescope. And I can tell that you've been here a while, and you probably are in the mood for a party." He says, "Well, I'm throwing one on Saturday. And it's going to be a party like no other party you've been to." He said, "There's going to be drinking. There's going to be smoking. There's going to be fighting. There's going to be swearing and cussing. There's going to be sex. There's going to be dancing. There's going to be everything. Why don't you come? You need a break." And the guy said, "Well, I do. I'm coming. What do I wear?" The guy said, "Well, what you got on is fine." He said, "It's just going to be me and you." There was an old couple that got married. They were real old in a nursing home. And the first night, their wedding night, they held hands. And the second night, they held hands. And on the third night, as he reached for her hand, she said, "Honey, not tonight. I have a headache." This guy is in the penitentiary for the first time, and his cellmate has a book of jokes. And he goes up front and he opens the book and he picks a number and he says, 17. And all the people in their cells are laughing their asses off. And The guy says to him, how come they're laughing? He says, well, we've told these jokes so many times that I just have to tell them the number, and they laugh. I don't have to go through the whole joke. He says, well, here, let me try. So he looks and he goes up and he says, 58! And nobody says anything. There's no laughter. And he goes back, he says, what's up? He says, well, some people just don't know how to tell a joke. Excuse me. There was a gorilla at the Cleveland Zoo that was going nuts. It was a female and she was in heat. And she was so much in heat that she was going to hurt herself. So they had to do something. They put an ad in the paper. They said, gorilla lover wanted, fee $50. Well, on Monday, there's only one person came. And that was a Polak. And he said, I saw your ad, I'll do it. Let me see the gorilla. So he looked at the gorilla. And he looked at her for 10 minutes. And then he came back and he said, well, I'll do it, but I'll only do it under 3 conditions, he said. He said, number 1, there'll be no kissing or hugging. And number 2, any offspring from this union will be raised Polish, Catholic. And number 3, give me a week to raise the $50. Again. Hey, what do you get when you cross a penis with a potato? You get a dictator. A penis went to see a psychiatrist. He said, doctor, I really have a miserable life. I'm surrounded by, I live with 2 nuts and I'm living next to an asshole. 3 nuns were killed in a car crash, and together they knocked on the pearly gates to be admitted into heaven. And St. Peter said, well, to get into heaven, all you have to do is answer a simple question. So he said to the first nun, what's 2 and 2? And she said, well, it's 4. He said, you're in. And there was a sound of heaven, and in she went. So the second nun said, St. Peter said to the second nun, what color is the sky? And she said, well, it's blue. And he said, you're right. And into heaven she went. And finally, the third nun came, and St. Peter said, when Eve saw the naked Adam for the first time, what did she say? And she said, oh my, that's a hard one. And into heaven she went. Huh? Okay. 3 men were knocking on heaven's door to see St. Peter. And the first guy was white. And St. Peter said, you can get into heaven if you can spell a word. And he said, okay, what's the word? He said, spell bird. And so the guy said, B-I-R-D. He said, you're in. So the second guy was white, and St. Peter said, you can get into heaven if you spell a word. And he said, what's the word? He said, spell home. And so the guy said, H-O-M-E, and in he went. Third guy was black. And St. Peter said, you want to get into heaven? All you got to do is spell a word. And he said, okay, what's the word? He said, spell luminescence. There was a Polak who all of his life dreamt about riding a horse. And he had his first chance to do it. There it was. So he jumped on the saddle and off he went. And the horse was mighty rugged. It was bouncing him up and down. He grabbed onto the reins and he put his feet in the stirrup, but he went up and down, up and down. And finally the horse bobbed in such a way that he fell off, but his foot was caught in the stirrup and he was bouncing against the ground. And no one knew what to do until the manager came out and he pulled the plug and shut the horse off. A very young boy and girl were friends. And she had her first period. She showed him the blood, and the boy said to her, "Oh, no wonder someone ripped off your balls." Okay, one more practice. That's sort of funny, maybe. But that other one, why would I think that was funny with the French? Okay, here we go. This one's a longer one, but I'll tell it so it's practice for me. By the way, do I look okay, sort of? All right, good. That's all because I'll never get better than okay. Okay, these two young nuns come into a liquor store and they say to their clerk, we'd like to have a bottle of rum. And the guy said, I didn't know that nuns drank. And they said, oh, no, this is not for us. This is for Mother Superior. She's constipated and we want to do something about it. And so he sold them the rum. Well, a bit later, he looks out the window and these two nuns are in the car passing the bottle of rum back and forth, totally sloshed out of their minds. And he was curious. He walked out. He said, hey, you told me that this rum was because your Mother Superior was constipated. But you're drinking it. And one of the nuns laughing said, well, when she sees us, believe me, she'll shit. Okay, those are the four for today. All right. Did you record those? All of them? Now, if they're good enough, we don't have to do them again. So God comes down to earth and he goes to the Egyptians and he says, I have some commandments. And the Egyptians said, we have our own. We don't want them. Go away. So he goes to the Greeks and he said, I have some commandments. And the Greeks say, we have plenty of those. We're not interested. Thank you. He goes to Moses. He says, I have commandments. And Moses says, hey, how much are they? And God says, oh, they're free. He said, oh, great, I'll take 10. Hey, I got to tell you something. This has been a dream come true. I wanted someday to record 44 jokes in a way that I could somehow think that when I'm done and nothing but ashes under a tree, someone's going to say, hey, go look at this. Look at my Billy jokes. So this guy goes to a bar and he has 5 shots of scotch. He drinks them real quickly and he collapses. And that irritates one of the attendants at the bar who comes over and kicks him hard right in the ass. Well, the next day, same guy comes back. He orders 5 straight shots of scotch, takes them right down. He collapses. And the same guy comes over, kicks him hard in the ass. Well, he comes in on the 3rd day, and the bartender is getting ready to pour him 5 shots of scotch. The guy says, no scotch. He says, give me tequila. He says, that stuff is really hard. Scotch is hard on my ass. Guy goes see a doctor. He has holes in his penis. And when he goes to pee, the pee is going out all over the place. So the doctor writes him a prescription. And the guy says, is this going to heal me? He says, this guy is a specialist. He teaches clarinet. A girl was in a quandary. She said, I have 2 boyfriends. She is talking to her girlfriend on the phone. She says, I have 2 boyfriends. She says, Tom is a slob. He just cares for himself. He doesn't give a shit about me. He's only good in the bedroom. Makes me laugh. And then Bill, now Bill is neat. He takes care of me. He gives me gifts. He's attentive to all my needs. He makes me laugh. I just don't know which one I should focus on. And the woman says, well, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with focusing on Bill? And she says, well, he's gay. A Catholic farmer was having sex for 4 years with one of his hogs. He felt guilty, so he went to confession and he said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. For the last 4 years, I've been having sex with one of my pigs." And the priest said, "Was the pig a male or a female?" And he said, "Father, it was a female. What do you think I am, queer?" A man takes Viagra for the first time and he makes love to his wife 7 times that night. He goes to confession the next day and he says, "Bless me, Father, last night I made love to my wife 7 times. And the priest said, "Well, that's not a sin. She's your wife." He said, "I know, but I had to tell someone." A priest, a lawyer, and 3 Cub Scouts are on a tour. And the pilot calls up into the cockpit and he says, "I have to tell you this. I can't do anything about it, but we're going to crash it. We have 3 parachutes. The kids are young in the back. They're only Cub Scouts. Give the parachutes to them so they can live their lives." And the lawyer said, "Fuck them." And the priest said, "Do we have time?" A salesman was driving across Nevada in a desert and he saw a sign, "Little Sisters of the Poor Whorehouse, 20 miles. He said, I can't believe that. 10 miles later, there was another sign, had a picture of a nice looking young nun and it said, winking at the camera, and it said, "Little Sisters of the Poor Whorehouse, 10 miles. Well, the signs continued until there he was. It said, "Little Sisters of the Poor." There were 3 young, gorgeous nuns smiling, saying 1 mile. So he goes to the whorehouse, and it's like a giant cathedral kind of thing. And there's a light, a red light above the door. And he goes in, and the sign says, "Little Sisters of the Poor Whorehouse." And he goes in, and a real pretty little nun comes out and says, "We're glad you're here. Please put $50 into this tray and put it into over there and then go to that door." So he did just what the nun said, and he went to the door and he opened it and he went through and he was in the parking lot. And there was a sign that said, "You have just been fucked by the Little Sisters of the Poor." A 90-year-old billionaire married a 21-year-old model, gorgeous model. And she was obviously married him because she was hoping for the money, but he was hoping for more. He married her on Christmas because it was so romantic. And that night, Christmas night, they made love for the first time, and she was surprised because the old man was incredibly vigorous. In fact, he was as good as a young man. And she was just happy as could be. And she said to him, "Darling, you're such a great lover." And he said, "Well, next time I make love to you, you're going to sweat." And she said, "Oh my God, is it going to be that good?" And he said, "No, it'll be on the 4th of July. This man went to see a psychiatrist because he thought he had a sexual problem. So the psychiatrist decided to show him a bunch of those Rorschach pictures to see what his problem might be. So he showed him the first picture, and the man said, "That's a couple having sex." He showed him the second picture, and the man said, "Oh, that's a naked lady." He showed him the third picture. He said, "Oh, that's 3 people having sex together." The psychiatrist said, "Well, I think you do have a sex problem." And the man said, "Me? You're the one with the dirty pictures." It was the first day of class in the first grade, and the teacher wanted everybody to stand up and tell the class what their father did for a living. And a little boy stood up and he said, "My father is a lawyer and he does all kinds of legal things." And the little girl stood up and she said, "My father's a doctor and he does all kinds of medical things." And the third boy stood up and he said, "My father is dead." And the teacher said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What did he do before he died?" And the boy said, "He went." So a man walks into a psychiatrist's office wearing nothing but saran wrap. He's totally wrapped in clear saran wrap. And the psychiatrist looks at him and says, "I can clearly see your nuts." Hey, you know what they call a lesbian dinosaur? A lickalotopus. And they call a dinosaur that has a bad case of hemorrhoids a megasaurus. So this woman went to see a doctor and she said, "Doctor, I don't have any sex drive whatsoever." And he said, "Well, listen, let me give you some of these testosterone pills. I think they'll help." So she takes them for a month and she goes back and she says, "Doctor, I really do have a sex drive now, but look at all the hair I have." He said, "Well, that comes with the pills." She says, "But I have balls now." This guy was real sad at work, and his buddy said to him, "Hey, what's wrong?" He said, "Oh, I had a terrible Freudian slip at breakfast this morning. I wanted to say to my wife, pass the butter, but instead I said, 'You ugly bitch, you ruined my life.'" A man walks into a psychiatrist's office and says, "Hey, I have trouble making friends. You think you can help me, you ugly fat fuck?" Okay, wait. There was a proctologist who was tired of his career as a proctologist, so he decided to do something much easier and become an auto mechanic. So he went to an auto mechanic school, and he passed the final test in flying colors like you wouldn't believe. The final test was to dismantle and replace a carburetor. He got an A++, and when he asked the teacher, the instructor, "How come I got such a high grade?" He said, "Well, replacing a carburetor is hard enough, but you're the first person I've ever seen who did it through the back tailpipe." So there was this blonde driving erratically, and a police officer spotted her, and he pulled her over, and he looked, and in the back of the car were 6 penguins. And he said, "Ma'am, why are you driving like this?" She said, "It's so hard for me to go anywhere. I don't know what to do with these penguins." And he said to her, "Oh, why don't you take them to the zoo?" She says, "Hey, that's a good idea, officer. That's what I'm going to do." Well, the next day, she was there again, driving funny. And the officer stopped her, but this time, the 6 penguins were wearing sunglasses. And he said, "Well, wait a minute. I told you to take these penguins to the zoo." And she said, "Officer, I did, and it was good. But now we're going to the beach." There was a first mate that for years worked with the same ship's captain. And he noticed the captain had an odd habit. After every evening meal, the captain would go into his cabin and open up a locker and look inside and then close it. He did this every night. The first mate saw this through the porthole, but he never asked the captain why he was doing it. Well, when the captain passed away, the first mate went into the captain's room and he opened up the locker to see what was the captain looking at. And inside was a little sign that said, "Port is left, starboard is right." There was a man who wanted to know the secrets of life, what it was all about. And he was told that the only person who knew that secret was a guru who lived in the far Andes, in the top of a mountain that was almost impossible to get to. But if you went there, he had the secret of life. So the guy got together all the money he needed to get to travel there. And then he put together all of his gear, and it took him quite a while actually to climb the mountain to get to where this guru was. But there he was. He went up the mountain and he went to the cave, and inside the cave, sitting against the wall, facing the wall, was the guru, and all he was wearing was a loincloth. And the man said to him, "I'm sorry to bother you, master, but I've come a long way and I spent a lot of money. Could you please tell me, if you can, the secret of life?" And the guru said to him, "Do you think I'd be sitting here eating bugs, wearing a loincloth and staring at the wall if I knew the secret of life?" So a father and son were walking together, and they came across two dogs that were having intercourse. The dog was on top of the female, and the father didn't know quite what to say. So he said to the boy, "Look at that! Isn't that wonderful? How one dog is injured and the other dog is helping it get home." And the boy looked at his father and said, "Dad, it teaches you a lesson. Do somebody a favor and you get fucked." There was a man, an explorer, was in the jungle, who woke up one morning and he was surrounded by cannibals. He was captured and taken away, and they were going to eat him. And he said, "Oh my God, my God." He said, "I'm fucked, I'm fucked." And God said to him in a loud voice, "You are not fucked. Do what I tell you." God says to him, "Go to the chief and say, 'Chief, I hate your guts,' and spit in his face." The man said, I don't think that's such a good idea." God said, "Do what I said. Do what I said." So the man then asked to see the chief, and they took him to the chief. And he said, "Chief, you're an asshole. You suck." And he spit on the chief. And the chief said, "Take him out right now and burn him." And the voice from God said, "Now you are fucked."